All right, welcome back. Troubling numbers about our own country that too many either ignore or simply don't want to deal with. Right now, 1 in 100 Americans are behind bars. We incarcerate pretty much more people than any country in the West. We also are in the top 6 when it comes to executions, along with people like Yemen and Iran. Nearly 1 out of 3 black men, however, compared to 1 in 100 Americans, 1 in 3 will spend time in prison during their lifetime, 1/3, and black Americans are 10 times more likely than their white counterparts to be jailed for the same drug-related crimes. Statistics like this not only lead to outrage, obviously, but they have led today's specialists to a bold conclusion that the so-called war on drugs is literally a comparison to slavery and Jim Crow in the destructive impact it has not only on those who are incarcerated, but on those who live in black communities, into which we then export prison culture back into. And she says it is that bad even in the age of the pride of a black president. Michelle Alexander is a civil rights advocate, law professor, and author of the best-selling new book, The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Color Blindness. Excuse me, Professor. What do we do about this?
Well, we first have to be willing to tell the truth, the whole truth, that we as a nation have managed to rebirth a caste-like system in America. Even in the age of color blindness, even in the age of Obama, something akin to a caste system is alive and well in this country. The mass incarceration of poor people of color is tantamount to a new caste system. Thanks to the war on drugs and the Get Tough movement, millions of people, overwhelmingly poor people, especially black and brown men, have been swept into our nation's prisons and jails, primarily for nonviolent and drug-related offenses, the very sorts of crimes that occur with roughly equal frequency in middle-class white neighborhoods and on college campuses, but go largely ignored, are swept into our prisons and jails at relatively young ages, sometimes before they're even old enough to vote, and once swept in, they're trapped for life. After being branded a criminal or a felon, they're stripped of the very civil and human rights supposedly won in the civil rights movement, like the right to vote, the right to serve on juries, the right to be free of legal discrimination in employment, housing, access to education and public benefits. So many of the old forms of discrimination that we supposedly left behind during the Jim Crow era are suddenly legal again once you've been branded a felon. That's why I say we haven't ended racial caste in America. I feel like
where people get
redesigned it.
Yeah, where people get lost in this is they fail to recognize that the exact crimes for which black and brown men are being incarcerated are being committed every day at the same frequency or a higher frequency by white or non-Hispanic, non-black individuals, Karen, and it's easy to be like, oh, well, you know, they must have been doing something, you know, there's got to be something they were doing, and that's sort of the easy knee-jerk, but that quite statistically is absolutely, completely, and utterly wrong, which leads you to really see the only distinguishing characteristic is the race of the individuals, Karen, and whether with the same crime, totally different treatment. Am I missing something?
No, I think that's right, and I guess part of what I would put out there, I would love the professor's reaction is, what strikes me is that what you're talking about, I mean, we have structural racism, right, that is a self-fulfilling prophecy. So we have young black and brown men being incarcerated and charged with these crimes at a much higher rate, as Dylan and you were just talking about. At the same time, there are, we know, alive and well, because we are not a colorblind society, the same, you know, there are racist stereotypes, biases, what have you, that would tell someone if they see an African American American engaging in a particular act, that they are therefore not only guilty, but should be charged in a different way than a white person, in the same way that if you see a black kid in the rain with a hoodie on, you might think that he looks out of place.
Well, what I look at, Professor, is the stop and frisk data. They did the hot spotting on the stop and frisk in New York, and you could see explicitly, well, I have never been stopped and frisked. I've lived in New York for 20 years. None of my white friends have ever been stopped and frisked walking, but there are very specific neighborhoods where this happens. To what degree can this be changed by rule changes, and to what degree is this really a function of our culture, and until we change our culture, we won't change this?
Well, it is a function both of mindset and legal rules and policies. You know, it's easy to demonize George Zimmerman for effectively stalking a young black teenager who looked out of place in his neighborhood and then killing him. But the reality is that the Zimmerman mindset, the mindset of viewing young black men as suspicious, as a problem, as
as a risk, ought to be dealt as with. A higher risk event. As
a risk, someone who needs to be controlled and dealt with at nearly all costs. That mindset is normalized within law enforcement, and if George Zimmerman had had a badge with his gun, we wouldn't even know Trayvon Martin's name today. The reality is that what George Zimmerman did is routine, common practice for law enforcement, seeing young black men, thinking that, you know, it would be a wise idea to stop them, question them, interrogate them, find out who they are, what they're doing, frisk them without any evidence of criminal activity, without any reasonable suspicion at all, is routine. The New York Police Department released data showing that in 1 year alone, 2010, the New York Police Department stopped and frisked more than 600,000 people, more than 85% of whom were black and Latino. And in only a tiny fraction, I think it was less than 15% of those stops and frisks, was there any kind of suspect description or investigation into an actual criminal case. So hundreds of thousands of people stopped and frisked and treated like criminals for no reason other than the color of their skin.
Unfortunately, we do not. This is something that we will obviously continue to visit as we have been. Tremendous book, Professor Michelle Alexander. I could not more highly recommend it. The New Jim Crow: Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness. And I'll leave you with this quote from Russell Simmons, who was with us on MLK Day, in which he said explicitly, I'll quote him, "Our biggest impediment has been the lobbyists. Those prison industrial complexes have been very strong lobbyists, and even more than even any political ideal that keeps people in prison." Russell was making the point that the economic connection between the profitability of the private prison industrial complex is yet another exacerbating component on what really is a national shame. Again, congratulations, Professor Alexander. Thanks to Jimmy and Susan for their patience at the desk today. Karen, we'll see you soon. Professor, I hope your voice gets louder, and anything I can do to help it, you have my commitment to do so. Straight ahead here, everybody.